All right.
Hey.
We are back better than ever, right, Brittany?
Mhm. Mhm.
So today we are talking about chapter 9, You Don't Even Know Me, Identity and Opposition in the Classroom.
Ooh, it's a big one,
This is a
especially
big
right now.
I know, I was just thinking like how timely this is with all things happening in our country and the world. I also love your sound effects too, Brittany, while we're doing this.
I know. Yeah, it
Okay.
needs sound effects.
It does. Okay. So I know I have the honors of the first summary today, right?
Yes.
You want to
Yes.
start me off?
Start you off. Let me grab my phone.
Oh,
Okay.
I made the
Um.
mistake of not like going back over the headings within like the last 10 minutes. So we'll see how this one goes.
Are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right. 2 minutes on the clock. 2 minute summary. Ready, set, go.
All right. So in chapter 9, You Don't Even Know Me, Identity and Opposition in the Classroom, we look at why tension exists in our classrooms through a racial and ethnic lens. So the first part is where Tishalis goes over the disproportionality of discipline by student ethnicity in schools. And this is so widespread, and he gives a whole bunch of facts and data, like literally my pages are just covered in ink, just proving like this exists. Number one. Number two, we need to do something about it. And one of the things that is a faulty do something about it that was called out is the myth of oppositional cultures. And this myth is basically the theory that our minority students are going to like rebel in school or not try in school because they don't want to act white, which has been totally debunked time and time again. But yet that theory still keeps getting brought out into light as if it has any merit, which it doesn't. So instead of that, we ended up looking at how the actual issue here is a lack of cultural responsiveness in classrooms and it's our marginalization that's happening that teachers and schools are doing. And how what we need to do now is look at these problems, listen to our students' resistance, take them seriously, and look at what we can do to make our schools more equitable and to stop this ongoing racism that is proliferating our schools. And I think I should end at that, Britt. A little
Okay.
bit early.
Okay. All right. My turn.
Let's do it.
Do you have your clock?
Yes. I was like, I'm just waiting for you. I forgot that element. All right, hang on one second. Oh, nope, that's news. All right, 2 minutes. You ready?
Yeah.
Go.
Okay. So in chapter 9, You Don't Even Know Me, Identity and Opposition in the Classroom, Eric Tashalis talks about different theories and research that has come about to explain the disproportionality with uh, school achievement and discipline when considering the students of the global majority versus their white counterparts. One of the theories that he talked about was the involuntary immigrants and voluntary immigrants, which I thought was really interesting because I studied involuntary immigrants, that theory, a while back, and I did find a lot of merit to it, in the sense that you would think that people who were forced to come to America, whether it was by colonization or slavery, they would naturally have, um, they would naturally oppose the institutions that try to get them to let go of their culture, to let go of their what's the um, their power in community, their celebration, their joy. Um, and he ended up talking about how that's not an accurate way to look at the marginalization and the discriminatory systems that exist. And there are other helpful ways to think about it and more accurate ways. And we're going to be talking about that today.
All right. And I feel like between both of our summaries, like we covered the overarching thing. So
I think
I completely
so.
forgot to mention that. But
Yeah. Well,
that's why it's good that we both summarize too, because then we
mhm,
pull at those things that each other may have missed or forgotten, and then we add on to
mhm.
make it more fleshed out for our listeners. So, could you just explain the voluntary and involuntary immigrants for people
Yeah.
who may have not read this chapter?
Yeah. So, um, involuntary immigrants are people that were forced to immigrate to America, um, Black or African, um, Hawaiian, Haitian, and Hispanic, Latino, um, Native American. And then you have voluntary immigrants, Asian, Indian, European. And the theory rests in that involuntary immigrants are going to oppose certain structures and systems because of that involuntary immigration and everything that comes with it. Where voluntary immigrants are going to embrace the systems because they came here voluntarily. So there's still a semblance of control, um, and they're more likely to embrace the culture that they're entering into and those systems that are in place. And this was I can't remember when I first read about it. I think it was in Bettina Love's um, We Want to Do More Than Just Survive. Um, and it's talked about in a bunch of texts and books and podcasts that are related to the Black experience in school. Um, but he brings up really good points in that one of the my favorite points he brought up was he referenced research that shows that the kids, especially Black students, when they are young, they embrace education. And it's proven that a high percentage of them um, value education and embrace it more than when they enter, I think it was like middle school. And
Yeah, well,
that
that's when the marginalization starts to really take a toll.
right, right. And there's another great book that talks about this. Why are all the Black kids sitting together in the
Yeah.
cafeteria? Um, about the experience of elementary versus middle school and high school. And I think that that is a crucial point. Um, and really like it debunks those myths that it's not the system that's creating these um the the differences in the experience and learning, but it's did I say it's not the system? Yeah. So
Yeah.
we have to really start considering, or not really start, we should, like, this is a this is where while I was reading this chapter and with everything that has come to light with the executive order that was issued, I believe, last night.
Yeah, and
um
for context, today's date is January 30th,
mhm.
2025. And so Trump released this executive order last night. That was something.
Yeah, that what was the title of the executive
I feel like
order,
it
do
was
you know?
indoctrination or something along those
Yeah,
lines.
yeah. And that, like, you can't teach about
Mhm.
DEI in the classroom, and then you need to teach about accurate accurate history, but you can't bring up anything that's anti-American or like
Yeah, and like
speaks against about
patriotic thing was mentioned in there. It was basically like nationalism.
it is. It absolutely is. So, I I have a lot of feelings towards this subject because
I know we were talking this morning. Brittany and I
Mhm.
were going back and forth this morning talking all about this.
There we have been talking about this for so long, and the fact that we still have to talk about like it still needs to be brought up and people still need to be educated, um, is kind of exhausting because so many people said that they were going to devote the time and the attention to educating themselves, back in 2019, and yet we're sitting here today in the same system talking about the same things. But I digress. When we're talking about this, it's
And
still is important to
yeah,
consider. Like,
it still is. And just like there's so much research and data. And like reading this chapter, I feel like you probably were the same way as me, where like you want to like throw the book because you're like, why are we still having these conversations? There's been data existing for this long, proving the effectiveness. Like there's so much information out there. I know that you and I have both like personally researched these
Mhm.
topics too. There's another really good book I have for examining your school's data to make sure that you are being equitable. It's in my closet over here, so I will link that one too. The title for this podcast. We're doing a whole bunch of things to this podcast episode notes.
Yeah, which is good for
Um,
everybody's.
but yeah, it is. But in case you are unaware that our schools have some severe disproportionate data, well, they do. It is quite alarming. Okay, I'm trying to find some of the statistics that he brought up. Okay, so here's one on page 204. So, okay, this everything we could read.
Mhm.
But I'm going to try to paraphrase this. So, since 2011, 2012, the government gathered data that shows African American students represent 15% of those in their sample size, but they made up 35% of students suspended once, 44% of those suspended more than once, and 36% of students expelled. And then over 50% of students who are involved in school-related arrests or received or referred to law enforcement are Hispanic or African American. And they're found to be more, let me see. This effective discipline found that African Americans are physically hit by educators at twice the rate of white students across the 19 states that still legally use that form of punishment. And then another thing, just further up on this page, it's from page 204. I don't know if I mentioned that before. But national, and this is from research from the 1970s, since then, national and state data show consistent pattern of Black disproportionality in school discipline over the past 30 years, specifically in suspension, expulsion, and office discipline referrals. And though the findings are not as consistent, similar patterns of disproportionality in school discipline have been documented for Latino and American Indian students as well. And that's just like one example, but there's so much there.
Did you go over the defiance referrals?
No, I haven't yet, but you want to talk about that?
Yeah, so Black students are the 30% of school enrollment, but they were 58% of the defiance referred. White students, 37% of school enrollment, and only comprised 5% of those referred for defiance. And I think that this would be a good segue into talking about how school culture because it is predominantly white, middle class, abled CIS women, and men.
It is predominantly women, though.
Mhm. How it is naturally going to occur that white culture is the norm, okay? It's going to happen. It is happening. And if we don't take steps to stop it from happening, to celebrate the students and where they're coming from and their cultural mannerisms and their interests and their styles of learning and their roots, if we don't act on that, then we are going to face higher behavior in the classroom just because the human brain needs that connection piece and
Yeah.
needs to feel a sense of control. Like,
Mhm.
so, um, it's I'm it's really hard for me because I've done this work for a while. Although I feel like there's a lot of white privilege in me saying that, like, oh, it's really hard for me as a white woman. Um, with but it is like I've had the arguments, I've had the discussions, I've started the podcasts, I started the Facebook groups. Um, I you show up to protests, you scream as loud as you can, and yet we're still here. Like, so I don't it's
And that's also what he talked about at the end of this book too,
mhm,
how confronting this racism in school. I think he called it something different. What did he call it? Whiteness, maybe? Interrogating whiteness at the end of the chapter.
oh yeah. Mhm,
How like doing this work, like it really should be like the white people who are like educating and doing their work,
mhm,
trying to get other white people like listen. And he also
mhm,
gave reasons why white educators often oppose interrogating their own whiteness and white privilege. And the reasons were they would be revealed to be ignorant of the behaviors of students of color, they'll be humiliated and called racist when conflicts arise, or they'll be devastated if and when their supposedly egalitarian ways of teaching in fact reveal inequities, from page 219.
mhm. Yes.
So people who are doing this work, like, especially if you are a white educator, like you need to take a stand. You have to be the one like speaking out and putting an end to this. If you're silent, you're complicit.
Yes. Um, and I think that it's a really good mindset to have, that there is no perfect advocacy. There is no perfect resistance. Um, you're going to get called out. You're going to say racist things as white educators. Um, you're going to get called, I should say, called in.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and there's like, yes, there is a form of shame in it, but that shame has been amplified to keep these discussions from happening. Like, I had a coaching client who a couple years ago, I was talking to her about this because she was a white teacher who taught at a predominantly white school, and then she moved to a predominantly black school, and everybody was calling she said everybody was calling her racist, and she didn't know how to deal with it. And she was a feminist, and I brought it into the mental sphere of talking to men about the sexism and the patriarchy.
Mm-hmm.
And when you talk to men about sexism and the patriarchy that exists and the oppression of women, if you have somebody who's so embarrassed or is so hesitant to talk about it because they don't want to be called sexist, we find that incredibly aggravating, right? Like,
Yeah.
and then if you have someone who's like, "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry," and just keeps bringing it up and like focuses on the fact on how they feel about it, on that it was
Very
embarrassing
unhelpful.
for them. It's so unhelpful. Like you just want to shout, like, "Shut up and just stop just stop doing it." But you
Yeah.
wouldn't consider it to be this huge big deal of the sexist, action or language that the person used, because it doesn't have the same shame that racism does for white people. And that shame is artificial. It is artificially created to stop these conversations from happening, to stop this work from being enacted, because white people are more like obsessed with how they're going to look and
Mhm.
feel than the work that actually needs to be done. Do not be embarrassed. Do not be ashamed for being called racist. I've been called racist so many times, and sometimes it was merited. And I'm
Yeah.
like, "Oh, dude, yeah, you're totally
Yeah.
right. That was racist. Like, I'm sorry. I will do better."
Yeah,
That's
and
all you
then
have to say.
you, like,
Mhm.
learn and move on and keep
Yeah,
trying to fight the fight in the right direction.
yeah, yeah. Consider it the same thing, like the same type of fight, the same type of like style of communication you would do for any type of advocacy, for disability advocacy, LGBTQ advocacy.
Mhm.
Like, yeah, that was a rant.
I know, I'm like, and that's the end of today's episode.
But I liked how he approached interrogating whiteness,
Me too.
especially. Oh, go ahead.
Um,
Sorry.
and that well, I'm gonna get us off this, so if you wanna say
Mhm.
something else, go for it.
Oh, so unless he says, which is really, I really think that this needs to be highlighted, unless there are experts of color who are willing and
Yeah,
available, and by willing, like, one, they need to be paid. Two, they need to
fairly.
be celebrated.
Not like
Right.
your $100 school stipend.
Yeah. No, no. This work, like, it's
Or, like,
emotion.
asking, like, the one black teacher on your team if they can talk about this. No, that is not what this
Mm,
is.
no. Um, and I mean, that has contributed to the black flight of
Mhm.
teachers. Like, so unless there are experts of color who are willing and available to lead these discussions, the sessions are probably best facilitated by whites for whites. Experienced anti-racist educators who are well versed in the many ways white educators come prepared by their culture to impede,
Mhm.
deny, and escape interrogation of whiteness are essential in this effort. And white spaces, okay, like, this needs to be a white space conversation, because your global majority teachers are already going to know that racism exists. And it's going to be isolating and infuriating. And you can think of it like if you had an all male dominated admin team and they wanted to talk to you about sexism, and they wanted to spend an entire hour talking about how sexism and the patriarchy oppresses women.
Yeah, and then the quote that the
Mhm,
Shaws has for that from 220, "It can be
mhm,
infuriating for educators of color to share their experiences of racism and exclusion, only to watch as whites shift everyone's attention to occasions in which they felt excluded or victimized by reverse racism."
mhm,
And, like, even before our podcast started, I was just scrolling Instagram, and every day is Juneteenth, like, one of their posts popped up. Like,
mhm,
just like this, like, thought process, we have to
mhm,
change it.
mm, yeah. Um, one of the best books I've ever read about white feminism, and it's called The Trouble with White Women. Um, Kyla Schuler. It's over there. I'm trying to read the name
I know,
on
I've been
my
doing that too, I'm,
thing.
like, trying to squint at my
Yeah,
bookshelf back there to,
yeah.
like, find different titles, but I think what we'll do, Brittany, is we should link a whole bunch of books and a whole bunch
Mhm.
of other Instagram accounts that people can follow.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm gonna need everybody to actually read them. because there were so many people that bought so many books in 2019, and those
They
books
sit on
collected
the shelf
dust.
collecting dust.
And now we're here with
Mhm.
an executive order that really doesn't make any sense.
Yes.
Okay.
Anyways, the other two things I feel like we should cover.
Mhm.
I feel like we should talk about how dangerous the myth oppositional cultures is, and then talk about solutions.
Okay.
So I feel like I explained this myth on my summary. Do you want to add your 2 cents to the myth of oppositional cultures?
He talked a lot about oppositional cultures and had several theories in it. Do you have one specific theory that you were talking about?
The primary one.
Involuntary immigration?
Mm,
The avoiding of acting white.
yeah.
Okay. Yeah, he says he has a pretty good quote about it, about that it's the idea of acting white is rooted in white supremacy. Um, mm,
There's so
so
much
that
goodness in this chapter. Like, get this book and read it,
and
guys, if you're just listening.
yeah. So oh, well, there's one thing that I want to touch on, and that's when the desegregation of schools
Oh,
and how that
yeah.
led to the loss of Black admin and Black teachers.
Mhm.
Um,
Okay, well, maybe we can just go there then. We can
okay.
say, yeah, we can say that oppositional cultures, this is a myth. Like the belief that the global minority students are like going to not try to achieve because they don't want to appear white, that's false. It's our marginalization that's leading to that. And speaking of which, can you talk about what you just mentioned, Brittany?
Yeah, so when Brown versus Board of Education decision came into, or um, took
Mhm.
action, it happened.
1954.
Yes, the schools were desegregated, but what that looked like was that Black schools were completely shut down, and Black teachers and Black admin were completely
Mhm.
like they just weren't considered for these desegregated schools. So it was just a bunch of Black and global majority kids coming into white spaces, and they did not um, had provide the opportunities for the Black teachers that would be necessary for consideration of the students' culture and the learning styles and what has, previously been taught, and the culture of the school. So um, he says through these zoning laws, real estate practices, legislative priorities, housing regulations, school choice, school funding, and school closings that all happened during the desegregation era. We saw a bunch of, the kind of Black power figures lost lost their not voice, but like podium,
Mhm.
and white flight occurred at the same time, which everybody should know about white flight. And if you don't, it's um, the white population, their money leaves an area and
Mhm.
leaves a highly popularized space of poverty. So between white flight and the destroying of the Black school systems that existed, Brown versus Board of Education did desegregate, but it didn't do the job that everybody claims it. Like we put it on this pedestal, um, but there was actually some really negative side effects.
And also, it says, like a few lines before it starts talking about desegregation, is that today's African American Latino students are actually more isolated than they were 40 years ago on page 214.
Yeah. If you look, I did a master's research project on this about how like the not you can't say desegregated, but the schools that say that they are what's the word, like I don't know, mixed, like they've got
Diverse.
diverse, yeah, that they're diverse. They're a majority white and a small minority of the global majority. So then when you look at the schools that exist like in the urban areas, they're 99.9% global majority, Black, Latino, Asian, Hispanic, and they've got, you know, a 0.1 percentage of white students. So it's still segregated.
Yeah. Still like that, guys. We have not come too far. But I feel like we should talk about some solutions now, like what we can do. And one of these things is to lean into culturally responsive pedagogy. Right? I'm trying to figure out. I highlight some information here. Okay. So this is from page 217. Culturally responsive pedagogy, when done well, exposes students to political and historical content that directly addresses discrimination, stereotypes, institutional racism, and interpersonal prejudice. So it's going to cover those things. It gives students the context they need to understand what they are experiencing or perpetuating, and it provides a venue for safer explorations of how oppression might be productively resisted. Research has made it clear that students will be less likely to resist their educators and schooling experiences when youth are given ample opportunities to learn more about their othered cultural heritage. So we have to be doing this work. Like you have to do this. And that's why I think like even seeing the executive order is just so alarming. Like seeing this document coming out, like refuting the need for this. Like there's a need for this and it's real. And there's research that proves it's crucial. Cruciality is not a word, I don't think, but it's crucialness. Like cruciality should be a word. That can be our next merch piece. I love how we have a whole merch shop of things that we've never created.
I know. Put it on a mug. So my action step is going to be like you can read, listen, go into different spaces where you're not the majority. Celebrate differences in your classroom. That's honestly like you really celebrate the differences of the way students communicate, the way that they that they show joy, their family and culture. Have them bring something in and share it, and let it be an everybody activity, and just like provide extra space for activities like that during this time. There's rebellion in that, like, so
yeah. And mine goes along with that, and it's to amplify the different cultures in your spaces and to make kids feel seen. Like even last year I did, it was our first year changing curriculums, and we taught a religion unit. And for the kids, like even doing that religion unit, like seeing their religion and like being able to connect to it and talk to that with their classmates. Like it was so awesome just like being the facilitator in that space. And you can do that in so many ways. Like let kids be themselves and amplify their cultures and how special that is. And I think one more final thing, it's to always be doing the work that we need to do to make our society more equitable and just for everybody.
Yeah. I kind of want to leave on a quote.
Oh, I like it. We're changing things up.
Yeah, and it's on page 217. When ethnic and racial pride is viewed as something to enhance, not suppress, good things happen for global majority students. They may begin to think, I will represent my school because my school represents me. I like
I
that.
love it. And I love how we also highlight the same things.
Yeah.
So let's leave you on that, guys. Another chapter in the books.
Yes. We hope this. Oh,
I was going to say before we go into our exit, we'll also leave a whole bunch of links in this description. So check that out and look for some books to definitely read or listen to on Audible or something, and then some other educator accounts or even just like activism accounts to follow.
Yes.
And now the sign off, Brittany.
Yeah, we hope this episode left you re-energized.
Girl, they're in season 2. We start with remoralized.
Oh, we hope this episode leaves you remoralized
and re-energized and always on your toes to see how this send-off's gonna go. Take care, everybody. Stay safe.
Bye.